Hey guys, it's time to Nevis and chill, and as promised, after we reviewed the patch notes for Greymoor with Outcast and saw the changes to the Tormentor set that legitimize PvE Werewolf tanking at last, that comes with Greymoor, I'm bringing to you my first ever PvE Werewolf tank build for you guys to make use of if you're ever interested in becoming a werewolf and tanking as one, whether you're in 4-man content or a few trials. Yes, trials. I'd like to put out this disclaimer that for certain veteran content, werewolf tanking will definitely be challenging and very risky. Specifically, I'm talking about Black Rose Prison, Sunspire, and Kind's Aegis on veteran and hard mode due to how werewolf functions. I'll be going over the main 4-man content build and expanding upon it for trial scenarios where you can use a couple setups for normal or veteran Hellrod Citadel, Ethereal Archive, Sanctum Ophidia, Maw of Lorcage, Asylum Sanctorium, Halls of Fabrication, and Cloud Rest. The focus of the Devour build is to optimize werewolf tanking for both 4-man content and 12-man content. While you can generally tank on any race and class even as a werewolf, in this case I highly recommend being a Nord at the very least and a Nord Templar for reasons I'll get into here soon. As always, if you guys want to support my content creation, please do subscribe as it means a lot to me. You guys have been the most fantastic community to me and I appreciate your ongoing support. First, we're going to start with a non-werewolf form in this build. It's important in any case to always prepare for times where you may be caught out of werewolf form, whether it's because of long stretches of time in a dungeon, when you're traveling from one area or one trash to the next. I'm looking at you, Lara Marcelak, or if, for whatever reason, something goes wrong. First, we'll look at the stats, Mundus, and raise. Again, I mentioned we are a Nord. There's a few reasons why you want to be Nord, for werewolf specifically. And we gotta look at the Nord racial passes for this. The Resist Frost gives us max health, which is pretty nice. The cold immunity or cold resistance can be nice for certain content, but it's not mandatory, obviously. Stalwart passive gives us a nice max stamina boost. But also, this is pretty important, when you take damage, you gain 5 ultimate. This effect can occur once every 10 seconds. This is a guaranteed ultimate proc, and this basically lets you get away with not running Bloodspawn. So this essentially replaces Bloodspawn for you as a werewolf tank that will need other monster sets that are more critical to your tanking abilities and so forth. The next passive is Rugged, and this is also a really good passive for werewolves, because unless you're wearing Chudan, you don't have a source of Major Ward, Major Resolve to boost your physical and spell resistances by 5,280. So the Rugged passive is going to be really nice as a Nord for a werewolf tank build that won't have a source of Major Ward, Major Resolve, and also you also don't get passives to weapon passives. So if you're wearing Sword and Board, for example, let's say on your werewolf bar or where you will transform into a werewolf, these passives, they go inactive. Same for the Frost Staff passives, they go inactive. Although funnily enough, as I'll touch upon later, the Tri-Focus passive still works, but that's a bug. Your block should not cost Magicka, regardless of whether you have an Ice Staff or not. So that's just a bug. It may work this patch, they'll probably fix it in the future patch. There's also another bug I'll touch on that you guys will be glad to know that they'll probably fix in a future patch. Anyway, that's why we're choosing Nord. Now, why Templar? Well, that will relate to the Tormentor set, which is a mandatory set for the werewolf tank build. And the reason being is this skill right here, Explosive Charge. This is basically a actual hard AoE taunt. So just to show you guys an example real quick. According to Untaunted, we've literally taunted at least 11 to 12 targets here. This will work in dungeons. This will work in trials. So out of werewolf form, you'll have access to a very powerful option of AoE taunting every single thing in area. I tried spreading these out. It's a pretty far area of effect. I would say it's about, well, it says on Twitter it's 6 meters, but I would say it's about 7 meters or so, slightly larger than what the tooltip indicates after testing it by spreading these out. But yeah, this is one of the reasons why you're going to be Templar. Another reason why you're going to be Templar, we can look at the Templar passives here, is primarily just because of the Dawn's Wrath passive right here, Prism. Casting a Dawn's Wrath ability generates 3 ultimate. This can occur once every 6 seconds. Plus, we do have the Restoring Spirit passive, which reduces the health, magic, stamina, and ultimate cost of our abilities by 5%. This helps us in not only cost reduction of abilities while we're both out of and in werewolf form, but also helps us get back to werewolf form faster if need be, going down from 300-ish ultimate needed to 285 ultimate. You can obviously work with this passive to get this a bit lower, but that's something you can use for another setup. Now, in terms of stats and Mundus Stone, these are the stats I've decided I'm most comfortable with. I've tried out a couple things in dungeons on the PTS, and I would say a really comfortable, like a bare minimum. This is like the bare minimum. The bare minimum magic recovery is going to be at least 1,000 or 1,200. And this is because the main werewolf heal you'll need or you'll cast is magic based, and it is a really expensive very expensive magic cost ability, and I've tried different enchantments and combinations to try to reduce the cost, and the lowest I could get this to was about 4,600 without sacrificing too much. But after that, there's some diminishing returns on how much cost reduction you can get. So the difference between 4,600 and 4,700 ish max magic needed to cast your main heal as a werewolf tank. Not that big of a difference to warrant me sacrificing more stats for that in terms of enchantments and so forth. So we're going to have to go with a decent amount of magic recovery. And this can be gained with either recovery enchantments or the Atronach Mundus Stone, or both. And for this build, you can go with the Atronach or the Lord, depending on how comfortable you are with the build and also with the content. If you feel like you don't need the healing as much, or you're not depending too much on the werewolf based heal, definitely go Lord. The additional extra health will still help you tank regardless as a werewolf. So either Mundus is really great for this build. In terms of the food, we have built with sugar skulls. Now you can use the Bone Leader's Pack Broth, Pack Leader's Bone Broth, and that's sort of used in human form, ironically enough, to reduce the ultimate cost for turning into a werewolf. It does also reduce some of the cost of the werewolf abilities while you are in werewolf form, but the stats the Pack Leader's Bone Broth gives is not really great compared to Built with Sugar Skulls. So it basically, if you want to try hard and be sweaty about it, you can pop a Pack Leader's Bone Broth, then you pop a Built with Sugar Skulls to get the tank, and if you ever come out of human form, you can use the Bone Broth again and then back to Built with Sugar Skulls. But nobody's got really the time or money or care to do that, so I would just always suggest sticking with at least a purple Tri-Stat food and Built with Sugar Skulls. And that's pretty much it. In terms of maximum magical health and stamina on the Sword and Ward bar in non-werewolf form, we have about 17,000 max magicka, 41,000 max health, and 22,000 max stamina. Mag recovery, again, generally around 1,000 is pretty good. Health recovery is kind of irrelevant, but that 1,000 flat tick every 2 seconds is pretty nice. Stamina recovery is going to be pretty low, and there's a reason why. In terms of spell damage, weapon damage, whatever, if you want to build more into damage as a werewolf tank, you can. Although I won't really be covering those alternative setups in this video, because I'm going to be briefly mentioning a couple sets you can use. In terms of physical and spell resistance, again, I see questions like this on every other tank build video I've done. You do not need to reach max resistances, which is about 33,000. Once you get to about 24,000 for either spell or physical, you can end up tanking the hardest content generally as a tank. For werewolf though, like I said, we won't have a source of major war, major resolve, so you can see that it's going to be a little bit low. If we do have major war, major resolve, obviously it's going to be very, very high. And again, you don't need to achieve these numbers as long as you're around or at least 24,000 spell or physical resistance, you should be fine. Otherwise though, those are the stats. For the most part. In terms of itemization, I'm going to be going into a lot of detail here, so bear with me here, guys. Since this is a very new territory for both me and probably most of you who've never really considered werewolf tanking before Greymoor. Okay, so the first monster set we can consider, and probably use the most, is going to be Swarm Mothers. And Swarm Mothers is a very, very useful utility to set. Not only does it give us max stam and max magicka,
But when we block an attack from an enemy that is further than 8 meters from you, so this can be a melee ad backing you up to throw a dagger at you or something, or a archer ad or something that's shooting at you, as long as they're further than 8 meters away from you, provided they're not immovable like bosses, they will be pulled to you. And this effect can occur once every second. So as a werewolf, you don't have things like Dragon Knight chains or even the silver leash from the Fighters Guild that pulls in enemies. So this is going to be pretty nice to have once you are in werewolf form. Other sets we can consider is going to be Earthgore. It's a pretty great set to save you, especially as a werewolf tank if you're not used to it. Lord Warden is another set we can consider. This is going to be a significant still, despite its nerf post Greymoor, for both yourself and for the group. And again, remember, you don't have Major War Major Resolve, so that extra bit of resistance can definitely help with the harder vet content, especially in trials. And it is still used for specific scenarios in trials, despite its nerf post Greymoor, so keep that in mind. Dervacoon is going to be another monster set that's still strong despite being nerfed post Greymoor. That's just how good it was before Greymoor. This can be used a lot in a lot of forming content, especially Dragon's Arena. So keep this in mind, and it can be used for a lot of trash fights in veteran trials. So this is something definitely to consider or to have at hand. Since in most veteran trials, most of the ads are elite ads, which means they can't be pulled in. So Stormrunner is kind of useless in a lot of trials like Maul Lorcange. Tremor Scale. So Tremor Scale is interesting. So no longer, since you'll be taunting with Tormentor, which is a proc in itself as a werewolf, that proc does not proc Tremor Scale. So this is kind of useless, not in the sense that, oh, it's a shitty set, but in the sense that, oh, it's not gonna synergize or work at all with the werewolf build. So it is something to consider if it worked. So I already tested it, it's not meant to work, so there you go. Troll King is a pretty nice one. The only downside about this is it's kind of a more selfish monster set for yourself rather than something more useful for the group, because you don't really heal anyone, or you can't heal anyone when you're in werewolf form. You can obviously in non-werewolf form, but beyond that, it's just sort of something you can save for yourself. But yeah, those are the monsters that I would suggest. As you can see, the traits here is going to be well fitted on the head and sturdy on the shoulder. Now, enchantment wise, you can do prismatics, but after testing, I would say probably go with health enchantments on every single body piece. Your stats should be fine in terms of max stamina and even max magic with this setup I'm about to show you. The sturdy treat's going to help with blocking if you need to, but this build is not going to really emphasize blocking, because remember what I said earlier about the passives being gone. You don't really get this reduction of block cost or whatever, right? So sturdy, while yes, it's nice to block certain things like mechanics, this build will actually focus a lot more on rule dodging a lot of things like heavy attacks, just to guarantee your survival. You can block the heavy attacks from certain bosses, a lot of bosses, but a lot of endgame tanks, including myself, end up just rule dodging, because a good tank knows when to avoid damage rather than just take it. And especially in groups where you may not have a healer, or you're in an experienced group or a pug group, you may need to roll dodge. And this build will focus on that component quite a bit. But anyway, before I go on for too long, well fitted on the head, sturdy on the shoulder, health and chance on both. And our primary 5-piece set is going to be Tormentor. This is non-negotiable. If you want to actually PvE Werewolf Tank in Greymoor, you have to have 5 pieces of Tormentor active on at least your werewolf bar. I prefer it on my body. This is heavy, and unlike the weapon passives, the armor passives still count towards whether you're in non-werewolf form or werewolf form. So 5 heavy is really nice here. You'll notice that the head and shoulder is medium and light, and this is simply taking advantage of the Undaunted passive metal. It increases your max health, stamina, and magic by 2% per type of armor, heavy, medium, light that you have equipped. We have 3 total types of armor equipped, which means we get 6% extra stats to max magicka, max stamina, and max health. That's why I have medium, light, and 5 heavy. And I would suggest this 5-on-1 set for almost every tank build, but you don't. This won't make or break it. But it's pretty nice to have those extra stats, especially as a werewolf tank. Anyway, as you can see, we have well fitted on the head, chest, and legs, and then we end up with 4 sturdy, just in case you need to block quite a bit. Because again, if you're going to use Swarm Mothers, you are going to block during trash, just to pull in those range stats nicely. In terms of enchants, again, we went over it. Health enchants. And how does Tormentor work? Well, I'm going to be actually uploading a separate video dissecting how Tormentor works, what it works with, what it doesn't work with. But in short, it works with Werewolf. And this is the main reason why I decided to make a Werewolf tank build, because now it's viable. Now it's actually viable. Now it's actually legitimate. Because previously, before this set was changed for Greymoor, you could not taunt anything as a Werewolf. Sure, you could soft aggro. Sure, you could, like maybe catch some aggro by damaging a boss first, but that aggro is never really guaranteed. If you're not sure what a soft aggro is, or hard taunts are, or over taunting is, feel free to check out my guide on ESO aggro. It's another video. But anyway, before I go off on a tangent, when you deal direct damage with a charge, leap, teleport, or pull ability, you gain X amount of physical and spell resistance and taunt the enemy to attack you for 15 seconds. Not only does this give us additional physical and spell resistance, remember, we're a little bit under that 24,000 spot for physical, but once we pounce, that's going to go up to 2,500 or 26 or 25,000, 26,000-ish. And what skill do we use as a werewolf tank to taunt? And this is going to go into the werewolf skills a little bit, but just to give you guys a quick heads up, feral pounce or brutal pounce, either morph, will be able to taunt single target ads or bosses. So let's say we transform and then we leap onto like this target, I'll taunt it. But now you may be asking, Nephis, what about focus charge? Wouldn't brutal pounce, the other morph, which does AoE damage, affect or at least do this same exact thing as focus charge? Why don't you have brutal pounce? Why do you have feral pounce? The number one, or just the only reason actually, is because brutal pounce at the moment is bugged with the Tormentor set. I'm not sure when the fix is going to come out, but yes, it is confirmed that it is a bug. It should work, but right now for Greymoor patch right now, it does not work. So regardless of which morph you take, you can only taunt one thing at a time. And if they do fix it, when they fix it, it's going to be super fucking awesome. And you will definitely use the brutal pounce morph. So other than that, there's no real reason to use brutal pounce, simply because it's bugged at the moment with Tormentor. Once they do fix it, yes, use brutal pounce. But right now, feral pounce is probably the better option here, just because it guarantees you lasting a little bit longer in werewolf form. That's pretty much the only difference between feral pounce and brutal pounce. Feral pounce gives you extra time in werewolf transformation by 1 second, and also gives you some stand back if you deal damage with the feral pounce or the feral carnage proc after you use it. Anyway, that's again non-negotiable. You need to use it, and it's not too bad of a stat gain. I just don't like the 4% healing taken on the 3-piece, 4-piece too much. But this does let us allocate our recipe away from certain quick recovery, so it's not too bad. Anyway, on to the next secondary 5-piece set, and there's also going to be a 2-piece set. This is going to be preference or optional, but the main 5-piece set with Tormentor, I've decided after testing, is going to be the Hunt Leader set. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, okay, so you decide to go for this instead of Alkosh, Eben, or whatever. And I'm like, yes. I mean, it's pretty obvious to a lot of us, or a lot of experienced players, that that's what you're going to be using, like Eben, Alkosh, Defiled even, or other 5-piece sets for trials. Yes, you will that's what I would actually recommend for trials. But for 4-man content especially, the Hunt Leader set is going to be really, really great. And I've actually been having a lot of fun using this. It's a huge amount of sustain and healing. So basically what it does is it gives you max stamina, and this plays into why our max stamina was looking so good despite having such a high amount of health as a werewolf tank. It's going to give us weapon damage, which is not really relevant, but if you want to build more into the damage aspect of this werewolf tank, you can. But the fifth piece bonus is pretty interesting. When your pets attack an enemy you have also attacked in the last 10 seconds, you heal for 2749 health and restore 1216 stamina. And this occurs once every 5 seconds. That is a pretty good amount of stam regen and also health back once every 5 seconds. And of course, you know which morph we're going with, right? We're going with the pack leader morph, and I'll get more into that after I explain the rest of the alternative sets. In terms of traits for jewelry and staff, we're going to have infused on one necklace. Now, there is a new enchantment or rune in Deco, which gives us a reduction of health, magic, and stamina cost of abilities by 100-ish. But once you have an infused necklace, this will give you 213 magicka stamina cost reduction and health cost reduction if you're using health-based abilities. But as a werewolf, you're only going to be having magicka and stamina cost abilities. And this is part of the reason why we can cut down the cost reduction on a lot of these expensive werewolf skills. Because werewolf skills are definitely a pain in sustain after a prolonged fight. So this is going to be pretty significant to have. Otherwise, you're going to have healthy traits on the rings. Again, you notice here that we added 1 magic recovery and 1 magic cost reduction. And we have such a high enough max stam pool, plus the passes from the werewolf, like savage, well, not savage strength, where is it? Pursuit, increases the stamina in your heavy attacks restored by 50%. We have such passives and a large enough max stam pool, we don't really have to worry too much about like stam recovery or something. So that's why we're focusing a lot on magic cost reduction and magic recovery, and stam cost reduction over stam recovery. And this is a pretty comfortable setup. Like I said earlier, about 1,000 magic recovery has been pretty comfortable for me so far as a werewolf tank in forming content. It's going to be much better in trials because you get a lot more synergies from your healers, or you should, and fights tend to last shorter depending on group DPS. But also the nature of the trial fights is not constant damage. It's not all these mobs at one after another. It's usually just there's breaks. For those of you who've done even normal trials, you'll know what I mean. But anyway, those are the traits and enchantments on the jewelry on the hunt. And for the eye staff, now why an eye staff? Why would you choose an eye staff, Nephis? Because you told us none of these passes work. So why not a sword and ward? Well, there's 2 reasons. The first reason is, and I do recommend not putting anything in Trifocus, it is bugged. You're not supposed to be able to use Magicka to block on a werewolf. But there's basically just one reason, and that's because of the enchantment and trait. The enchantment of the weapon you're on, plus the trait it's boosted by, is going to be active while you're in werewolf form. So the Crusher enchantment, which is a very basic and integral part of a tank's debuff toolkit, is going to be active. So you can put this by light attacking a boss. Easy as that. That's it. No wall needed, no endless hail. You just light attack a boss and it'll be active for 5 seconds. Then you can reactivate it. That's pretty much the only reason why we have a 2-hander. But we also have a frost staff for another reason. Remember, if you're ever caught out of werewolf form and you're in non-werewolf form, you can still put down a blockade to keep up Crusher enchant until you get back to werewolf form. So the blockade of frost or whatever of lightning will still keep up Crusher enchant on one target, or in this case a boss, which is really, really helpful. But yeah, these are the traits we want. These are the traits and enchantments we want for sure. The Master's Perfected Sword and Shield, this is going to be our 2-piece on the front bar. Now this is sort of a flex spot. If you have, if you farmed Hunt from like Master Marino, if you farmed like Hunt Sword and Board, you can do that. But honestly, there's no reason to really double bar Hunt because you're only gonna go Werewolf on one bar anyway. So that's why I'm kind of toying around right now with Masters. A lot of people suggested that my Infinity Dragon Knight tank build that has basically infinite sustain to suggest the Maelstrom Sword and Board as an alternative. I don't like the Maelstrom Sword and Board because it's not a huge gain back, because you have to use like Heroic Slash and you have to heavy attack, which is, I don't know, I don't really like that. But the Master's Sword and Shield is a viable alternative to this 2-piece flex spot. Obviously you can do other things, but you can try it out. But after trying this out, it's actually pretty good. When you deal damage with Puncture, you heal for 6,926 health, and then you gain spell and physical resistance equal to the amount of healing or overhealing done for 5 seconds. Now you don't need that extra resistance, it's more for the heal. And Templar tank in general doesn't have a great self-heal. The only thing you have is Vigor. This is why you see a lot of Templar tanks in vet content not even like run Breath of Life, or rather they shouldn't. Breath of Life or, you know, Honor to them. They are Magicka based. Unlike Dragon Knight, Nightblade, Warden, even Necromancer heals, which scale off of max health or missing health, the Templar class heal does not scale off of missing or max health. So that's a pretty weak heal for both yourself, and the fact that these heals go to other people instead of you in critical moments sucks real bad. I can tell you that for sure, especially in vet trials. So resolving Vigor plus the heal from Master Sword and Board is going to be noticeable in terms of your survival until you get back to werewolf form. Anyway, with that being said, in terms of traits and enchants, you can do, well, it naturally comes with a prismatic enchant, so you can keep it like that. You can do Infuse or another well-fitted piece, although I am liking the Infuse so far with this build. In terms of the trait on the sword, I would suggest Decisive, because this will stack with your Nord ult gain to get back to werewolf transformation, plus Minor Heroism, which we'll have, as you'll see here. And you can also slot up Poison if you need, or if you want, like Drain Health Poison number 9, and that'll still be, the Decisive trait will still be active, just not the enchantment. So that's pretty OP. In terms of skills, before we go into the werewolf form and show you guys the actual werewolf tank, we're going to have Resolving Vigor, Pierce Armor, which we kind of just explained, Explosive Charge, very, very handy now, as you can see. And Heroic Slash, it gives us minor maim on a target, while granting us minor heroism, granting our ultimate every 1.5 seconds for 12 seconds. It's pretty much a must for a lot of tanking builds. Power of the Light, and this is going to play into that passive earlier when you cast a Dawn's Wrath ability, generates ultimate. But also Power of the Light is a pretty powerful debuff to have at hand in both 4-man and 12-man content. In terms of the ultimate on the Sword and Board bar, since you'll want to go to werewolf tanking, you're not going to really slot any other expensive skills like Aggressive Horn. I would suggest slotting Remembrance, because 1, it's cheap, relatively cheap, and 2, for what it does, it's pretty powerful. You get major protection, reducing the damage you take by 30% for 10 seconds. I've solo tanked without a healer on Vet Frostfelt Harm mode as a Templar tank, just because of this skill. That's how powerful it is, and I would definitely suggest it for emergencies. It's a great heal for the group, and also you're basically kind of almost invincible as long as you don't fuck up way too much as a Templar tank in any content. On the back bar, which is our werewolf transformation bar, we do have Restoring Focus, and Restoring Focus is typically the morph instead of channel focus that most Templar tanks go for, because unlike Dragon Knight tanks or even a couple of the other tank classes, we don't really have a great way to generate stamina back while blocking. Like Dragon Knights have Igni Shield, or rather a Earthen Heart passive that grants them stamina back every time they cast an Earthen Heart ability. Templars don't really have that, and that's kind of also the reason why I didn't go with Black Rose Asylum one-hander and shield, because it's a huge stam drain. And a Templar tank, while you're using your self-based or self-heal, which is based on stamina, plus while your melee, taunt, and debuff are stam-based, plus Power of the Light is stam-based, and you have to keep it up every 6 seconds, it's going to be a huge stam drain. So that's why we have Restoring Focus. Silver Leash is also stam-based, so there's another reason for Restoring Focus. This is actually going to pull you, or not pull you, but pull adds in. out of werewolf form. And blockade, we kind of explained, is just kind of there for keeping a crusher enchant. And also, depending on the type of staff, whether it's a frost staff or a lightning staff, it's going to bring certain benefits to your group. Like frost staff will usually, if chilled enemies are in its in its path, they become frozen or immobilized for 4 seconds. Plus, you also have the chance to minor maim them. So it's got like a little mini AoE minor maim, like a heroic slash, but AoE wise. Lightning staff, if targets are concussed, they will become off balance, which generally means more DPS for the group, as it says on the blockade tooltip. Blockade of storm sets concussed enemies off balance. Anyway, the next skill here on the non-werewolf form is Extended Ritual. Just a nice passive healing over time, plus the fact that it offers a synergy if anyone gets a debuff on them, and also it acts as a purge for yourself. And Repentance. Now Repentance is just basically free sustain back for yourself. While it doesn't give stamina back to other people anymore, it used to. It still does give you stamina and health back to you, but also restores health to everybody else that's hit by the Repentance when you drain the corpses. Finally, the Pack Leader morph. Why the Pack Leader morph and why not Berserker? There's 2 reasons. Pack Leader, while transformed, your max stamina is increased by 30%. This is shared with the Berserker. You take 10% less damage, however, while you summon 2 direwolves. And the whole thing about 2 direwolves plays into why we have the hunt. And while we're in werewolf form, they cannot die anymore. They are non-targetable wolves. They cannot die. So while your wolves are attacking the enemy that aren't even aggroed onto them or can't even hit them, you're also attacking them in the last 10 seconds, you're healing for 2749 health and restoring 12, 16, 7 back every 5 seconds. That's pretty insane. And there's another reason. You also grant yourself and nearby allies minor courage. For those of you who don't know, there is a set called Yonakrin from Sunspire's, the Sunspire trial, the Ellsworth trial. And that is one of the top tanking sets for all PvE tanks to bring to 12-man content. Even 4-man content, you'll see use for it because it does stack up with passives, and the 129 weapon and spell damage is not just 129. It stacks up with other multipliers for the DPS in the group. So the fact that you have minor courage, which is only available through an entire 5-piece set, already negates a need for Yonakrin. And this is not only just great for 4-man content, but also 12-man content. Think about it. If you are bringing a Werewolf Tank, the Pack Leader morph, you don't need to bring Yonakrin. Although, you can argue also that the Tormentor takes up another 5-piece slot anyway, so that also kind of negates the passive. But at the same time, it's pretty cool that ZeniMax added the minor courage. This definitely brings a lot more utility from being a Pack Leader, also being a Werewolf Tank to the group. So I'm pretty happy with this. And again, it's replacing a 5-piece set for 4-man content anyway, which can let you experiment with the secondary 5-piece set, or even perhaps a mythic item in the future. Now let's transform into a werewolf. Alright, as you guys can see, we are now a werewolf. Feral Pounce, we kind of explained why we're going with this over Brutal Pounce. And we are in this house that lengthens our werewolf transformation by quite indefinitely. So a lot of people have asked that in the last video where I covered werewolf tanking, but that could potentially become a thing for Greymoor in PvE. How can you stay in werewolf form for so long? This house, Hunter's Blade, provides that buff, just like the new vampire house will probably make your vampire transformation almost permanent. Anyway, the second skill is Hurricane's Fortitude. We talked about this at length earlier as well. This ability, the healing done, is going to scale up off of your max health. If you are at full health, you instead restore 3000 stamina. So in addition to our large stam pool, in addition to Pursuit, where we get 50% extra stam back, if we 50% more extra stam back if we heavy attack, we also get more stam back if we heal ourselves at full. So that's, as you can see, I'll show you. That's a pretty insane amount of stam regen. So again, this is why I'm not really concerned with stamina cost reduction or stamina recovery compared to magic cost and magic recovery for the werewolf tank. While slotted, you gain major brutality, increasing your weapon damage by 20%. It's something nice to have. It's basically you don't need to invest into weapon power pots or whatever. You can just use regular old tripods that give health, magic, and stand back, and still retain major brutality plus major savagery. So again, if you want to build more into the damage aspect of a werewolf as a tank, you for sure can without worrying about using weapon power pots. The skill itself here, Deafening Roar, it's a pretty interesting one. It's basically guaranteed off balance on enemies. And of course there is a cooldown off balance, but the fact that it's an AoE guarantee on off balance is pretty OP, especially in tight dungeon packs. Your Roar also leaves enemies dazed, applying major fracture and minor maim. And that reduces their physical resistance by 5,280. Now, a lot of us who also looked at werewolf tanking a long time ago were like, okay, well, how do we provide a debuff for the group? We do have the Crusher enchant, but we need major fracture or major breach at the very least. And this is the answer as a Greymoor. This is how you provide, at the very least, for stam DPS, more penetration. We also do get minor maim, which, if you recall, we could get from Heroic Slash or the Destruction Staff Frost Blockade. But now we have an AoE minor maim for pretty much free if we use Deafening Roar, which is pretty interesting. Just like that. Note that it only affects up to 6 enemies per cast. So as you noticed, it only affected 6 targets over here. But that's still more than enough for most trash packs and dungeons and even for 12-man content. Howl of Despair. Howl of Despair is basically something you can use if you have the stam for it, depending on the fight. And basically, you target a boss or enemy, you roar at them, and people who are targeting the enemy with their reticle can activate the Feeding Frenzy synergy, which grants them unlimited uses of Empower for 5 seconds. So a lot of sets like Gallonway, which we covered too in the previous video, once you use that Empower, it's gone. And then you have to like wait for the set to refresh after 2 more seconds for you to get another Empower to buff your light attacks. But for this, Howl of Despair, you get unlimited Empower. So how many line attacks you can do, however many line attacks you can do within those 5 seconds with as you light weave as a DPS, it's going to be buffed by 40%, each one overall. And that's roughly, if we had to do the math on this, if a werewolf tank can keep it up, probably gonna be an overall 2% DPS gain, maybe 3% at most, maybe even more, potentially, depending on the fight. Also note that Howl of Despair, the Empower synergy is shown up to 12 people per cast. So there's no, if you roar at a target, only 3 people around the target will get the Empower synergy. No. It's up to 12 people who can see the synergy and synergize the Feeding Frenzy synergy and get Empower. So this is going to be pretty cool in trials, where if you bring a werewolf tank or something, every other group DPS can take advantage of it. Even the tank can use it to proc Alkosh if need be, if you're not wearing Alkosh. So that's a pretty cool skill to have. Claws of Life. Claws of Life is basically a heal. You just heal yourself for the 113% of the damage over time caused. It's a stamina-based heal, and this scales off of certain CP perks I'll show you. Now, before we finish up with the CP allocations, I know I mentioned alternative sets for trials, and I'll expand upon that. Well, basically, like I mentioned earlier, Ebon, Alkosh, Dragon's Defilement, Worm, Herseens, the typical tank sets you still use. Still going to be used on a werewolf tank in trials. Since you are going to be providing a Yonakrin, an innate Yonakrin, there's no need for the other tank, whether they're the main tank or the off tank, to really put on Yonakrin. So you kind of, but again, that's negated by the fact you have to wear Tormentor as a werewolf tank. So it's really up to you if you want to wear Alkash or main tank or off tank and wear Evan. That's really dependent on your group, but again, these sets are still going to be the same regardless of whether you're a werewolf or not for a lot of fights and trials. So definitely ask your group what they want you to wear, and of course for what fights. That's pretty much it. I did test other sets, and I didn't want to bring this up, but I might as well bring it up. Of course, if you want to build more into the damage aspect of a werewolf tank, Blood Moon or Reliquin is definitely a solid option. It's just free damage. We did try testing, with the help of Olibo, Kind's Wind. So it does not work on a werewolf. We tried even like putting a Resto Staff to proc Major Mending, but apparently proccing Major Mending by heavy attacking with a Resto Staff does not affect or proc Kind's Wind. And of course, this is actually another consideration we can have. I'm also going to make a video on this as well for tanks. Vrol's Command. So Vrol's Command is actually pretty strong. After dealing damage with a fully charged heavy attack, which plays into our benefits as a werewolf, apply Major Aegis to you and up to 11 nearby group members for 10 seconds. Major Aegis is not really needed for most 4-man content. It's not needed for most 12-man content, but in terms of no deathing, in terms of also guaranteeing people not dying, in terms of the new fights, such as the last boss and Kind's Aegis Hardman, it can be good. So I would suggest looking into this too as a werewolf tank if you don't want to wear Alkash or the other sets I just kind of mentioned for your group, or if your group wants you to wear Vrol's Command. You can still use this for 4-man content. It's just, you shouldn't need it, but if you want to use it, go for it. Alright, champion points. So in terms of 4-man content, 81 Ironclad, 56 Hardy, 56 Ellie, 66 Thick, and 11 Quick Recovery. You can probably put that Quick Recovery towards heavy armor focus actually, since we do have quite a bit of healing received stats from Tormentor. So you can do that for 4-man content, and this CP allocation in terms of mitigation will work for all 4-man content. This is actually the Black Rose CP suggested by ESOU and myself, optimized for Black Rose Prison. If you are going to go into trials, I would also look into our other CP allocations in the ESOU Discord. These CP allocations will also be put up on the upcoming and new ESOU-university.com website. That'll be up within the next 6 weeks, hopefully, as of making of this video. In terms of the green CP, 51 Warlord, 16 Bashing Focus, 16 Sprinter, 43 Tenacity, and 72 is Tumbling, 72 Shadow Ward. If you feel like you have a bit of extra from Tumbling and the other CPs, you can definitely put it towards Arcanus if you feel like you don't need Tenacity, which in my opinion you don't, but this is kind of making it safe for you to get that stamina back. You can definitely allocate into at least 10% Arcanus to actually bring up your magic recovery a little bit more, but it's not going to be too significant. In terms of blue CP, we have 64 Blessed, 56 Elfborn, and 2 physical weapon extra, 28 Master at Arms. Again, if you want to spec a lot more into damage, you can drew this, like physical, because this does affect light attacks in werewolf form, and you can also spec more to mighty, piercing, precise strikes. Otherwise, the 64 Blessed, 56 Elfborn are gonna still affect the healing you get from Claws of Life, Deafening Roar, Hunt, so that's really up to you. 44 Precise Strikes, 39 Piercing, 37 Mighty, as long as you get the 120 points overall into the ritual to get that Last Stand perk, which gives you Major Heroism if you fall below 20% health. Again, this is more for the non-werewolf tank form, so keep that in mind. If you want to fully invest into the werewolf tank form, definitely consider going into more damage spec. And that's pretty much it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this build. Thought a lot about it, tested quite a lot of stuff, including if the passives were actually working and why the Destro Staff Trifocus passive was working for some reason, testing various sets to combine with Tormentor, but this is pretty much the best I can come up with for Greymoor. Hopefully you enjoy the hunt, hopefully you enjoy the Tormentor, hopefully you enjoy everything about this build. And I'm definitely going to be using this for trials. I'm really interested actually to see if I can get no death in certain trials as a werewolf tank. But hopefully I'll probably live stream it. And yeah, again, thanks so much for your support, guys. I'll see you guys next time. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun, and see ya.